Hi, it's June 1st. It's hard to believe we're getting close to being through the pandemic and now we're dealing with all the unrest in the country. It's a scary time. I'm going to be reading from chapter 4, and I wish I could say it was a soothing chapter, but it's not. It's a pivotal part of the piece of the book. From this a lot. I mean, this is a very important chapter. I am going to stop my cuckoo clock because it's going to make noise. So hang on one second. Otherwise, you'll hear the cuckoo. But sometimes when you do, I forget to stop it. It's a pretty nice sound. So this is not a chapter for children, just because it's not. And you're going to be mad at me probably, but this is the way when I write, I sort of see it. I'm a Stephen King. I read his book he wrote this great book on writing, and he said that he's an organic writer, and I'm reading along. My daughter Laura had said, given me this book, and it made a lot of sense to me, this book. And when I read the book, I was, that's how I write, because he described how the type of writing style that I have and what he has. So it's just the way it went down, this chapter. So it's a tough chapter. Bear with me. It's a good chapter. So as you recall, Helena has been stranded in this village on the steppes of Russia, what will become Russia. She's near an Aral Sea. If you looked it up, you'll see it was a great inland sea. But now it's not what it was. And she's a girl who's grown up in a household where her opinion was mattered. She was given an education, which was, pretty good for the 400s, because women weren't really valued that much beyond as basically broodmares. But she was treated with respect by her grandfather, so she was given a strong sense of self, who loved her. And they were en route to Persia, because he thought he was getting old. Something happened, and you'll hear more about it later. And so she's in this village, and she's married. She got married to the clansman who took her all her riches. Figured that was her dowry. Thought he did the right thing, although he never sent word home. Although she asked to do that. And meanwhile, she has this son. That's the only good thing that's come out of this. She loves this little boy, Mikhail. So in the middle of the night, a rider comes in and says he's warning them about Huns, but as it turns out, he's riding with Huns, and Helena had figured it out, and she went up against Kansbar's son Ivan, and he assaulted her, he really hit her, and this tall stranger who's with the Ostrogoth, he rescued her. So she was really thinking that when she first saw him, maybe he was from home. Maybe he had news maybe they knew. Maybe she was going to be rescued by this guy. But then all the Huns came, and it was very, 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 very scary. And in the middle of all this is a typical Hun, a traditional Hun, who's always on his horse. You got all the, marks in his, scarred up, because that's what they did. And it was like, that was their culture. And so she has escaped from all the chaos, and she's taken her horse, her grandfather's Arabian stallion. I have an Arabian horse, so, trying to escape, and her mare, who's coming along with her, and she hasn't ridden for a long time because, she's been, treated like chattel. So she's free in a moment, in a manner of speaking, is trying to escape from all the chaos, all these Huns. It's a terrible situation. So chapter 4. In the cold morning air, Pasiel, the horse, carried Helena and Mikhail across the steppes. The chestnut mare, Sorel, galloped alongside, her tail raised high. The animal's thudding hooves reverberated within her heart as if whispering, "Run, Helena, run." She shivered. "Mama, we go fast," Mikhail shouted, exhilarated the thrill of the wild ride supplanting his memory of the raiders. "Oh, Mika, I love you," she said. With her left arm, she held him tightly. In a low voice, she urged Pasiel on and pressed his sides with her heels. Instantly, he stretched out into a full run. Unburdened by a rider, the mare easily pulled ahead. A bird called, awakening in the early dawn. A small herd of antelope interrupted their grazing to watch the two horses racing the wind. Her muscles aching, Helena struggled to stay mounted. Horrible screams coming from the village trailed after them. The awful clamor was punctuated by an eerie, masculine roar. Her skin crawled. Only the heat of Pasiel's body and her racing heart kept her teeth from chattering with terror. "What's that, Mama?" She kept her voice level, protecting him. "I don't know, Mikhail." Helena scanned the horizon, searching for a place to hide, but the rolling steppes offered nothing, not even a gully. Though needing the cover of darkness, she longed for the sun. In the dim light, Pasiel could stumble into a foxhole, falling or even breaking a leg. She forced herself to trust his instincts, yet listened closely for any sound of chase. The beat of a galloping horse was unmistakable. She wanted to believe it was only an echo of Pasiel and the mare, but could not hide from the truth. Someone was gaining on them. Keeping a firm hold on Pasiel's mane, Helena turned to see a small brown horse. Its rider was not tall, matching his mount's diminutive size. A Hun. Her stomach contracted with fear. She kicked Pasiel, pushing him beyond his limits. In his youth, few horses could best him at a race, but he was 18, past his prime, and no longer in peak condition. His neck lathered with sweat. Helena knew from the roughness in his breathing that he could not last. The pace would kill him. The hoofbeats were louder, closer. She spied a clump of straggly bushes. "Mikhail, I'll hide you and lead the horsemen away." "No, don't leave me. I don't know what to do," she whispered with panic to herself. The bushes vanished behind them. Their pursuer's horse pounded a scant few strides away. Helena turned and saw Grilia, his face intense with animation. Horror steeled her resolve. Driving her left leg against Pasiel's side, she made him spring right. The Hun's mount easily duplicated the maneuver. Grilia laughed with raw glee. Helena was aware of everything. The pressure of Mikhail's body against her arm, the ache in her cheek from Ivan's fist, the smell of her own fear, even the colors in the sky as the sun emerged from its bed. Never before had she felt with such vividness what it meant to be alive. Grilia's voice slashed at her essence, taunting her in Gothic. "I've kept myself for you. The others will wait." Hate crystallized her courage. All at once, Helena visualized one of her knives deep in his stomach, the other in his throat. The image muted her panic. Suddenly his horse was at her left, breathing hard. As she faced her attacker, his forearm cracked her shoulder. The blow pushed her off balance, making her lose her precarious seat on Pasiel. Desperately, she tried to stay on, but he was slick with sweat. With no saddle to anchor her, the combine of Helena and Mikhail worked against them. They fell hard. Impact was sudden. The grass-covered ground was uncompromising. Helena cushioned Mikhail with her body, knocking the breath from her lungs. Involuntarily, she let go of him, and he flew from her arms. To recover, she needed to lie still just for a few moments, but time had become a luxury. Just a few feet away, Mikhail lay on the ground motionless. At a gallop, Grilia wheeled his horse into a tight circle, coming at her. Pasiel just started to swing back. In her heart, she knew he would be too late. She inched toward her son, dragging her stunned and bruised body across the ground. Each movement was agony. She whispered, "Mikhail." But he was still, eyes closed. Then Grilia was upon them, his horse's hoofs flashing, pounding hard. She saw death. Instead, the Hun leaned down and reached for her son. As Grilia lifted him, love lent her strength. She leapt and clutched Mikhail by the thigh. The Hun placed the boy across his saddle, stomach down, and her hand slipped to Mikhail's ankle. He woke and began to cry, high and piercing. Each frantic scream ripped at her heart. The brown horse ripped forward, dragging Helena, the soles of her feet bouncing on the ground. Grilla fixed his eyes on her. Let go before you hurt him. She held on, her whole being becoming the hand clinging to her son. The Hun twisted her fingers, forcing them back, and her hand fell away. She cried out, her fist clenched at air, then nothing. The coarse dry grass scraped her cheek and nose. She lay on the ground, incapacitated, feeling the earth rumble underneath with hoofbeats, both near and far. Warm breath blew against her neck. Helena turned with frantic fear, only to see the white horse above her. Pasiel! Using the animal's lowered neck, she pulled herself up. Her body was alive with pain, but she ignored it. Slippery with sweat, the horse steamed in the chill dawn air. 100 paces away, Mikhail screamed. With intense clarity, Helena saw him struggling helplessly in Grilia's arms. Panic nearly overwhelming her, Helena shouted, Mikhail! The Hun spun his horse to a halt, raising dust. The sun shone at the steps horizon like a fiery ball. She sobbed, Down, Pasiel! He obeyed, but Helena, weakened by her injuries, could scarcely mount. Grilia jumped down, dragging Mikhail, his small face contorted with terror. Bite him, Mikhail! She shouted astride Pasiel. She kicked her horse until he bolted forward toward her son. Grilia's lips contorted into a smile. He lifted the child by the hair, raising his feet from the ground, negating resistance. Mikhail's frantic screams became frenzied, striking his mother's heart. With desperation, she shouted in rough Gothic, No, don't hurt him. Take him. Take me, not him. Grilia made a horrible noise, a cross between a howl and a cackle. His arm before him, the Hun raised Mikhail higher, stretching his curly hair, and drew his sword. Remembering Ivan in that same blade, Helena's mouth opened, but her throat was still and soundless. Tears blurred her vision, but not enough to shield her from the sight of Mikhail's face distorted by a primal animal fear. Too afraid to scream, he whimpered. She rushed closer, uttering sounds like a roar. The Hun's laughter deepened. As with Ivan, Grilia held up his weapon in readiness for its deadly descent. Not believing what she saw, she begged, Please, no. Mikhail screamed, Mama. With a hum, the sword whistled downward, cutting the air, meeting Mikhail's neck with a grisly thump, snapping his spine. The body dropped to the ground. Grilia elevated Mikhail's head in triumph, his shout climatic. Sobbing, Helena continued her charge. The Hun stared at her, his smile welcoming. In an instant, he swept to his horse, making it sidestep to the right. No match for the large pony's agility. Pasiel swept forward, running flat out and missing him. In moments, Grilia was alongside, his arms reaching for her. Without a thought, Helena sat back hard, giving Pasiel the command to halt. He obeyed, his black leg sliding. Outmaneuvered, the Hun ran on a few strides. As Grilia wheeled back, he shouted, Now for you! Helena had passed beyond fear. As the horses pounded across the steps, she thought no further than her dagger in his throat. She refused to recognize Mikhail's head as a trophy Grilia held up to the sun. His horse neared, barely winded, in stark contrast to Pasiel, who labored for each breath. Though tears wet her cheeks, they were not for her. She did not care about her future, only the past, only Mikhail. He stretched his arm and grabbed her long hair. As he pulled, her scalp burned with agony, but the pain was not hers. She struggled, but a response came from her body's need to survive, not her mind. Again she sat back on Pasiel, her weight telling him to stop. But Grilia was not fooled by the same ploy. Remaining abreast, he laughed and pulled her toward him. Then dangles Mikhail's head before her eyes, taunting her. The white stallion snorted with fear at the odor of a fresh kill. As she gazed at Mikhail's remains, fury transformed her. She screamed not from helplessness, but rage. Reaching for the dagger at her knee, she pulled it from its sheath and plunged it deep into Grilia's forearm. With a howl, he released her. She extracted her knife with a sharp downward thrust. The Hun grunted with pain. Shifting her weight to the left, Helena urged Passio away, but the Hun grabbed her waist, dragging them to the ground. He reeked of blood. They landed together in a heap. At impact, he lost his grip on her torso. She rolled away and managed to pull herself to a stand. She faced him, dagger glinting in hand, miraculously unwounded by her own blade during the fall. His luck had held as well. He rose to his feet, brushing him off with deliberation. Off his horse, he was not as agile. No more games, woman, he sneered rather than smiled. Valamir will suffer when he discovers what is left of you. His thigh oozed from Ivan's wound. His forearm bled bright red, but none of his movements betrayed pain. With silent desperation, Helena clenched her weapon. As he unsheathed his sword, the sound hurt her teeth. Then quickly, with the flat of his blade, he struck her hand hard. From the force of impact, her palm opened, and the dagger dropped to the ground. She stared at it, golden in the sunlight. Suddenly the tip of Grelia's sword pricked under her chin. The Hun's eyes bored into her, alive with an intense, fanatical light. Useless, her right hand throbbed with pain. Without thought, she slipped the left one to her pocket, to the remaining knife, small and sharp. Locking eyes with her tormentor, she frantically worked to free her weapon from its wrappings. At the same moment, her mind wondered if death would be sweet. With a smile, Grelia gloated, savoring his victory. Though her cheeks were gritted with dust smeared with tears, her eyes were dry and watchful. Plead with me for mercy, bitch. Perhaps when I finish with you, I'll grant you an easy death. She stared, offering no reaction. He dug the point of his sword deeper, drawing more blood. Her eyes dropped to the silver blade. Unable to move, she stood still, barely breathing, her hand clutching her hidden knife. While keeping the pressure of his sword on her, he positioned himself behind her. He tightened his hold. Suddenly she felt her grandfather's presence. This was not the gentle love which she had known so well as a child. It was different, dark, incomprehensible, and raw with menace. Words formed within her throat, not of her own volition, but from someplace else. I'll destroy you, Grelia, she said in a harsh voice not her own. What? The Hun laughed, an ugly sound. You threaten me? Then pounding hoofbeats diverted his attention, lessening the pressure of his arm and sword. Her right elbow jammed into his ribs as her heel slid down his shin and landed hard on the top of his foot. He swore with pain as she spun from his grasp. She ran towards Pasiel, but a horse and rider intercepted her path. Hands lifted her up, sweeping her off the ground. Thinking of her knife, she looked at her new assailant. Instead, she saw Valamir. She felt nothing. No gratitude, no anger, not even hatred. Only deep fatigue. She trembled. On horseback, Grelia raced after them, but Valamir halted his roan to wait for his adversary. He positioned her behind him. Hold on, Helena, he said. Her hands remained limp at her sides. Gently he wrapped them around his waist, holding her wrist with his hand. Grelia roughly reined his horse in, forcing the animal's mouth to open from the pressure. I wasn't finished with her, Valamir. Where's the boy? Grelia laughed. In 2 pieces. Valamir was silent for a few heartbeats. Helena whispered to herself in Persian, her first language, the language of her cradle. He's dead. You bastard! He was under my protection. If you weren't Attila's cousin, you'd die today, Valamir shouted. Fine talk, but who gave you the right to take the pick of the women? Then come closer, Grelia. Fight for what you want. The Hun hesitated, shrugging his shoulders with a grimace. What's one woman in a village of so many? Then you best hurry, Valamir said with a nasty edge to his voice. I wonder how many have covered Maga. She was the first to be naked. Maybe there's some left for you. The sons of whores. They knew she was mine. Creating a cloud of dust, he whirled his horse in a circle and galloped towards the village. Valamir watched him as he grew smaller in the distance. Satisfied they were alone, the Goth dismounted and then lifted Helena down. Her mind reeled. She did not understand how she could be alive. It made no sense. Valamir's face was shuttered, but his blue eyes were bright with compassion. The sun had risen, the blue sky promised a clear day. In the dips of the undulating plain, frost shaded the grass. Helena began to shake. The Goth touched her bruised face. You shouldn't have run. I'd kept you both safe. Unable to speak, she sat. Her head lowered, she crossed her arms over her chest and rocked herself as if she would a child. She cried. He sat beside her. Tell me what happened, Helena. In the distance, the screaming from the village continued. Nearby, Pasiel and his mare cropped grass peacefully, while Valamir's horse grazed, moving toward them, making a bid for company. What happened to your boy? Ignoring him, she searched her eyes for the site of Nico's execution. Unable to find it, she stood in an attempt to walk. Her legs buckled. She cradled her face in her hands. Valimir spoke in careful Greek. Please talk to me, Helena. He spoke of a child. The sound of a childhood language beat against her inner sanctuary, weakening its walls. She needed to share the horror with anyone, even an enemy. Her voice tight. She muttered in Greek. He killed him, cut off his head for nothing, a little boy. He put his arm around her. His touch was gentle, but she flinched. Are you hurt? She laughed harshly. The question was stupid. Of course I'm hurt. Your confederate murdered my son. Steeling herself for his answering blow, Helena tensed. He dropped his arm from her side. You said you were from Constantinople. She blinked with disbelief. In the village, thatched roofs flamed. Men on horses chased their victims like dogs. The women were dying. Helena was certain slowly and with shame. Constantinople? What's Constantinople to me now? My son's dead. Over there, your people make sport of killing. I have no time for this. Be done with me. Death would be sweet. Valamir's eyes never left her face. His soft words were an assault. I'm sorry for your loss. Sympathy was the one weapon against which she had no defense. Looking away, she bit her lip. Her eyes brimmed with tears. I won't hurt you, Helena. I gave you my word. Will you accept it? No. He smiled ruefully. You're honest. I respect that. Helena dismissed him with a shrug. The anguish after her grandfather's death was nothing compared to the black emptiness that obliterated her soul. Are you from Constantinople? He asked again. Yes. It had become too much effort to resist his words. So you're far from home. Her voice was childish as she repeated, yes, far from home. Who was your guardian, Helena, when you lived at home? My grandfather. His name? Her response was again adult but belligerent. What do you care about his name? Please, Helena, tell me. I might have heard of him. I know people in Constantinople. Her eyes widened as a deep moan escaped from her lips. His name was Belusistram. They called him Belusistram, from the Persian. Valimir exhaled deeply. His voice was solemn. Helena, I came for you, in your grandfather's name. Your steward has offered a prince's ransom for information leading to your safe return. For 2 years I kept my eyes open. Wherever we roamed, though we don't travel near Constantinople soon, I'll find a way for you to go home. She whispered to herself, you were the messenger. Never, ever did I imagine that it would happen like this. You've cost me everything. You've cost me Mikkel. Helena, we've much to do. You can't let your son journey to his god without preparation. Help me find him, so we can cleanse him for his final passage. Her head jerked up, eyes blinking. Yes, you're right, she said with sudden agitation, renewing her strength. I must tend to my son. Valimir whistled to his horse, and the stallion trotted briskly to his master. Call your horses, Helena, or help me catch them. If not, you'll lose them forever. Pasiel, she called with a desperate edge to her voice. The white stallion lifted his head from the grass and nickered softly. Still exhausted, he walked to her, the mare following. Standing beside her, she buried her face in his mane. Valimir broke into her grief. Are they of Arab blood? Yes, she said, wishing he would stop his questions. Good. They'll keep the pace. He rummaged in his saddlebag. Help me halter them. We must keep them together. As Valamir pressed ropes to her right hand, the light weight made her cry out. The cords fell with a whisper. Taking her wrist, he held it gently, examining her hand from all sides. He lowered his face to better inspect it, and became vulnerable to Lena's remaining knife. But she did not draw it. Her call for revenge was specific. Only Grelia's blood would satisfy her need. Move your fingers. His voice was distant. Her voice was distant, her eyes fixed on nothing. I cannot. It's broken. We must keep it still. In no time, he had immobilized it with a piece of soft leather, preventing any movement of her fingers or wrist. Turning from her, he halted the horses. Your horse has no bridle. Remarkable. Before long, both horses were tied together, anchored securely to the roan's bridle. Come. To the roan's saddle. Come, we must find your son. He placed her on his stallion, jumping lightly behind her. With his arm circling her waist, they began a methodical search through the long grass for Mikhail's remains. So that's chapter 4. So, that's a pivotal thing that happened in her life. That's really horrific. Chapter 5 will not be so hard, I promise you that. So see me again next week. The book is available on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon. I have a website, katherinegnewcomer.net. And there also you can get signed copies on Amazon from me. I'm a bookseller on Amazon too. Let me see. I fixed it so I could receive checked out for notifications. So check the inbox, see if anybody says something. But we'll see. If you have any questions, you can always email me. Message me ahead of time, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. As part of the reading. I look forward to seeing you next week, and text. You can check my Facebook page, and I'm on YouTube, as you know, and please subscribe. And have a safe night. We're going through some troubling times. You would think that the 400s you could expect such chaos. You just don't expect this to be so chaotic today in 2020. Take care and be safe. Thanks for tuning in. I'm gonna stop streaming. Take care. Bye.